London, 1768. A man stood before the magistrate's court, holding a petition to erase his name. His name was William the Unfortunate, a title his family had borne for 3 generations. But he refused to be remembered as a walking joke, so he demanded to be called Nobody. The court laughed at his absurdity, but William's lawyer argued the name was a legal burden. William the Unfortunate had caused public humiliation and barred him from certain trades. The judge dismissed the case, but the public outcry forced the government to reconsider. A new law was drafted. Names could be changed if they caused persistent social harm. William, now legally Nobody, became a symbol of rebellion against absurdity. His story survived in court records, a footnote in British legal history. Today, he's remembered not as a joke, but as the first person to legally vanish from the record. The court. They were confused. Wait, you're trying to become a nonentity? They asked. And what does that even mean? Thomas, ever the showman, replied, "It means I'm free from my family's shame. Also, I'm tired of being called William the Unfortunate in taverns. It's not a nickname. It's a death sentence." The judge, a man named Sir Reginald Puddington, was both amused and horrified. He ruled that Thomas could legally become Nobody, but with a catch. He had to pay £50 in fees, which was like paying for a month's rent in 1768. Thomas, ever the optimist, said, "Worth it. I'm a nobody now. I can finally go to parties without being asked, 'What's your name and why does it sound like a curse?'" But here's the twist. The British government didn't just let this slide. They tried to arrest Thomas for being nobody because in their eyes, he was now an illegal entity. They said, "You can't just erase yourself from existence." That's not how the empire works. Thomas, now Nobody, became a folk hero. People started calling him the legal jester because he turned the system against itself. The British tried to revoke his name change, but Thomas had a lawyer who was basically a 18th century version of a meme lord. The lawyer argued, if you can legally become a nobody, then you can legally become a nobody. It's not a crime, it's a performance art. The court agreed, and Thomas kept his name. But then came the backfire. Thomas, now Nobody, tried to open a tavern called the Nobody Inn. It was a disaster. No one wanted to go there. People said, "Why would we drink at a place called the Nobody Inn?" That's like opening a restaurant called the Empty Plate. The tavern failed within a month. Thomas, now truly Nobody, went back to his old life. He still had to pay rent, and his family still called him William the Unfortunate behind his back. The lesson: you can't just erase yourself from existence and expect people to take you seriously. But here's the kicker. The British government still tried to arrest him for being Nobody. They said, "You're not allowed to be Nobody. That's against the law." Thomas, ever the showman, replied, "Then arrest me. I'm a nobody. I'm not even worth the trouble." And that's how Thomas Nobody became a legend. He was the first person in history to legally become a nobody, and the first person to fail at it. If you love history but hate boring textbooks, hit subscribe or I am calling the feds. And let me know in the comments which president would win in a bar fight. Thomas's Nobody Inn didn't just fail. It became a cautionary tale for anyone who ever thought edgy was a viable business model. The tavern sign, which read, "The Nobody Inn, where even the barkeep isn't here," was so cursed that local rats started avoiding the place. One customer, a man named Ebenezer Grumble, left a scathing review. The ale tasted like regret. The fire was out. The barmaid was literally nobody. But Thomas wasn't done. He doubled down, launching a side hustle as a professional nobody. He started giving lectures at the Royal Society, which was basically the 18th century version of TED Talks. His speech, titled "The Philosophy of Being Nobody, a Guide for the Disillusioned," was so absurd that the society had to ban him from wearing a hat. "You can't just show up as nobody and expect us to take you seriously," one member hissed. "You're not even a person anymore." Meanwhile, the British government was still trying to arrest him. They sent a constable named Reginald Puddington showed up at Thomas's home, only to find him sitting in a chair wearing a "I am nobody" t-shirt on kirt hante rain. Ian, I'd net we'd still be trying to get to about Peter Kite, Carnit, Amertine, Matkin, down the Department Howard to cared. There's an out and Harper till time and bright till Rick Hammer died to ain't out. And out we can't play it out didn't park towel to Von Tomic haunted apt. Down behind the elusive nobody, Puddington showed up at Thomas's home, only to find him sitting in a chair wearing a "I am nobody" t-shirt. Aptoid hammed, I'll cram me curt to bully come tard ham tando at armitrap and tard town to todic out and not to white turned out named. "You're under arrest for being nobody," Puddington barked. "That's a capital offense," Thomas, ever the showman, replied. "But I am nobody. I'm not even worth the trouble of arresting me. You're wasting your time, Constable Puddington." "Go arrest someone who matters," Puddington, confused and slightly embarrassed, muttered, "This is the worst job I've ever had," and left. But here's the twist. Thomas's antics had, accidentally, become a rallying cry for a tiny but vocal group of Enlightenment-era rebels who hated the British Empire. They started calling themselves the Nobodies, and they wore masks shaped like question marks. One of their leaders, a guy named Samuel, the question mark, quirk, Turkin Yatsgrand Tigarand, "We are the Nobodies. We are the forgotten. We are the unimportant. And that is the most rebellious thing we can be." The British government, now truly panicked, tried to pass a law making it illegal to be nobody. The law was called the Nobody Act of 1772, and it was so absurd that even the most loyal Tories laughed at it. One member of Parliament, a man named Sir Jonathan, the Laughing Man, Twinkle, name, Moke. Now, it says, "This is the most ridiculous law I've ever seen. It's like trying to outlaw air." But what no one expected was the rise of nobody as a political symbol. The nobodies started holding protests, demanding to be recognized as nobody. It was like an 18th century version of a viral TikTok trend gone wrong. And that's when the real chaos began. But what no one expected was the rise of the nobody movement, a cult of people who wanted to renounce their names too. Suddenly, Thomas wasn't just a weird guy with a law degree. He was a prophet of identity crisis. People started showing up at the London Magistrates' Court with petitions like, "I want to be called the disappointed," or "I'd prefer to be known as the person who forgot to brush their teeth." It was like the 18th century version of a TikTok trend. The British government, already confused by Thomas's original stunt, now had to deal with a full-blown identity rebellion. They tried to shut it down by passing a law that said, no one can legally be called nobody or any variation thereof. But here's the problem. The law didn't specify what counts as a variation, so people started getting creative. There was the oblivious, the disappointed, the person who hates their life, and even the person who hates their life more than everyone else. The courts were overwhelmed. Sir Reginald Puddington, the judge who originally ruled on Thomas's case, was now stuck presiding over a trial where a man named the Disappointed argued that his new name was a more accurate reflection of his emotional state. Puddington, who had once been a fan of Thomas's antics, now looked like he'd been dragged into a philosophical debate by a goat. Meanwhile, Thomas himself became a folk hero. People started dressing up as him for parties, wearing a sign that said, "I am nobody, and I'm fine with IT." He even got a nickname, the Legal Jester, because he turned the system against itself. But the real joke was on the British government, who had to spend months drafting a new law to stop people from becoming nobody. The law was a disaster. It read, "No citizen may renounce their identity in a manner that causes confusion, inconvenience, or mild amusement." But of course, that was too vague. Now the British had to deal with people trying to become the confused, the inconvenienced, and the mildly amused. It was like the government had accidentally created a new form of social media. In the end, Thomas Nobody's legacy was bigger than he ever imagined. He didn't just change his name, he changed the rules of the game. And while his tavern failed, his name became a symbol of rebellion. So next time you're stuck with a terrible name, remember, you can always become a nobody. Just don't expect the British to take it seriously. The British government, ever the masters of bureaucratic overreach, decided Thomas's nobody status was a direct affront to the empire's sense of self-importance. They sent a team of officials to his village, armed with parchment, quills, and a level of entitlement that made modern tax auditors look like friendly neighbors. "You cannot be nobody," they declared, as if the concept of non-existence was a legal loophole they'd personally invented. "This is a free society, but not too free. You must have a name, or we'll name you something worse." Meanwhile, Thomas's new identity was becoming a viral sensation. People started wearing nobody masks to parties, and a rival nobleman named Lord Puddington, Bort Puddington, Barn and the Chanterpain. They went tight to his canning, not row plan. Draw then writes the name for a line of luxury teapots. "Nobody's Earl Grey," he called it. Because everyone is someone, but nobody is nobody. The public was not impressed. Thomas, ever the showman, leaned into the chaos. He started giving interviews about the emancipation of the nameless. He claimed being a nobody was a form of rebellion, a middle finger to the system that forced people to have names like William the Unfortunate or Sir Reginald Puddington. His speeches were so wild, they were printed in pamphlets and sold by street vendors for a penny. One vendor even added a side note. Also, "This guy is a fraud. Don't trust him." But the real backfire came when the British tried to revoke his name change. They argued that nobody was an illegal entity, a void in the social fabric that needed to be patched immediately. They sent a lawyer named Mrs. de Molay, Agatha Pembleton, Beckton-Manor-Tout, and cried, "I'll argue the case." She said, "You cannot exist in a state of non-existence. That's not how the world works." Thomas, now, nobody replied with a smirk. "Then why does the world have taxes? That's a void in the system, and nobody's stopping you from paying it." The court, now fully confused, ruled that Thomas could keep his name, but only if he agreed to pay an additional £50 bounds in non-existence fees. Thomas, ever the optimist, said, "Worth it. I'm a nobody now. I can finally go to parties without being asked, 'What's your name, and why does it sound like a curse?'" He didn't realize the £50 was equivalent to a month's rent, and he was now literally broke. Desperate for cash, Thomas tried to monetize his nobody brand. He started selling nobody pins, nobody tea, and a book titled "How to Be Nobody, A Guide to Existence or the Lack Thereof." The book was a disaster. It had no chapters, just a single sentence repeated 150 times, "I am nobody. I am nobody. I am nobody." Critics called it the literary equivalent of a yawn. In the end, Thomas's name change backfired so hard it became a cautionary tale. He was still called William the Unfortunate by his family, still broke, and still legally a nobody. The British government, meanwhile, had to admit they'd been outmaneuvered by a man who wanted to be invisible. They said, "We'll get him next time." Thomas said, "I'll be invisible. You won't find me." And he disappeared into the annals of history, where he still haunts every legal document that mentions the word nobody. If you love history but hate boring textbooks, hit subscribe or I am calling the feds. And let me know in the comments which president would win in a bar fight. But here's the thing, the British government wasn't ready to let this go. They were like that one ex who keeps showing up at your door with a new friend and a list of your old passwords. They called Thomas Nobody a threat to the social order, a void in the fabric of the empire, and honestly, they had a point. If you could just erase yourself from existence, what's stopping the next guy from becoming the void or the null? The empire couldn't have that. So they dragged Thomas back into court. This time, not for the name change, but for unbecoming a person. The judge, Sir Reginald Puddington, who had previously ruled in Thomas's favor, was now sweating so hard he looked like a melted candle. The prosecution's argument? If you're nobody, then you're not a citizen. Therefore, you're not allowed to exist. It's a legal paradox, like a chicken that's also an egg. Thomas, now nobody, stood in the courtroom like a man who had just realized he was the punchline to a joke he didn't understand. His lawyer, a man named Jonathan, the meme lord Ren, leaned back in his chair and said, "Your Honor, the issue here is not whether Thomas is a nobody, but whether the Crown can legally define a person as someone who isn't a nobody. It's like trying to tax a shadow." The courtroom erupted in laughter. Even the bailiff snorted. Sir Reginald, who had been trying to maintain a stoic face, looked like he was about to cry. He ruled that Thomas could stay nobody, but had to pay an additional £100 in social order fees. Thomas, ever the showman, said, "Worth it. I'm a nobody now. I can finally go to parties without being asked, 'What's your name, and why does it sound like a curse?'" But then came the real backfire. The British government, in their infinite wisdom, decided to use Thomas as a propaganda tool. They printed posters of him with the caption, "This man is a nobody. Do not be like him." It backfired harder than a poorly aimed cannonball. Suddenly, Thomas became a folk hero. People started calling him the legal jester because he turned the system against itself. The colonies, which had already been annoyed with Britain's tax policies, now had a new rallying cry. "We are not nobodies." It was like when a kid in school gets in trouble for wearing a hat, and suddenly everyone else starts wearing hats too. The British tried to shut it down, but it was too late. The name Nobody had become a symbol of rebellion, and that's how Thomas Nobody became a legend. He was the first person in history to legally become a nobody, and the first person to accidentally start a revolution. If you love history but hate boring textbooks, hit subscribe or I am calling the feds. And let me know in the comments which president would win in a bar fight.